Welcome to the Morning Startup, where we believe you can develop neural pathways that will awaken you to a full heart and clear mind. Live with joy, health, and success. I'm your host, Michael Oliver, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Deborah Dyack and Maria Gosher. Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Sharon.
Good morning.
We are so happy to have Sharon Salzberg with us. We've been anticipating waiting for this. And so we are super excited. And thank you for joining us. You have such a busy schedule. So we're really fortunate to
and honored
and honored to have you joining us. So super excited. I just like to say that you just came off of your October 10-day Loving Kindness Challenge. And that is also recorded. I know you can get all those 10 days you can get through YouTube, I believe. So if you haven't had an opportunity to look at that for our listeners, that would be awesome to check out. You also have a Meta Hour podcast that you have, that show, and that's also available through your website, SharonSalzberg.com. So to kind of just jumpstart us off and help us listeners get to know you a little better, can you walk us through a little bit of your journey and really how you got to where you are today? You know, best-selling author, 11 books, and all the activities that you do. Your journey to that point would be interesting as well.
And I just want to say why we think this is so critical is because very often people, experts in mindfulness, meditation, loving kindness, and breathing do not have backgrounds that people don't feel connected. Well, someone who has an education, of course they can do it. I can't do it. You haven't been through what I've been through, but you're a very authentic person and sharing your life. We appreciate it, your journey. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, really. Well, it's been a while, so it's a lot to talk about. As my friends say, my young friends, oh, you were meditating before it was cool. So I grew up in New York City. I went to college when I was 16, being a product of New York City public schools, which like to have people skip grades. And when I was a sophomore, I took an Asian philosophy course, which honestly, looking back, as far as I could tell, it's kind of happenstance. There was a philosophy requirement. I needed to do something. I looked at the schedule. I thought, oh, that's convenient. Let me do that one. It fits in. And the course totally changed my life. So when we got to the section on Buddhism, and they talked about the Buddha saying that life has suffering. Mm-hmm. And I, like many people, had a very traumatic childhood with lots of loss and lots of change. And like for many people, mine was a family system where this was never spoken about. And so hearing that statement of the Buddhas, it was like the first time in my life, the subtext for me was, you belong. You're not so weird, Right. You're not so different. Everyone goes through some degree or another of these feelings. And that was a huge turning point for me. And then in the context of the class, I heard that there were tools, there were actual methods that people could use, very practical, very direct. They're called meditation. And if you use them, you could be a lot happier. So I was going to college in Buffalo, New York. This is 1970. I looked around Buffalo. I didn't see it anywhere. And I think about that moment so often, mm-hmm. because I could have easily, there would have been nothing easier than to say, I think I'll, pursue this in graduate school, or, I'll figure this out. I'll read some more about it. Or isn't that interesting? That might be nice someday. But it was nothing like that. I was like on fire. I thought I have to learn how to do this. So the university had an independent study program. I created a project. I said, I want to go to India and learn how to meditate. And they said, yes. So off I went in 1970. And I wanted something really practical. I wasn't interested in becoming a Buddhist. I wasn't interested in philosophy or comparative religion or rejecting anything else. I just wanted to learn the how-to. Mm-hmm. And it took a little bit of time in India to find just that kind of circumstance. And I did find it. And so I began meditating January 7th, 1971. And that was really the beginning. I frankly stayed a little longer than my year, my allotted year. I went back to Buffalo, did what I needed to do to get 2 years of independent study credit. So I finished school, went back to India, and came back to the States in 1974. And I came back essentially as a teacher because one of my own teachers, this woman named Deepa, had told me to teach. And so when I came back, some friends, Joseph Goldstein, Jack Cornfield, and I began teaching together a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And then in 1976, we established a retreat center, the Insight Meditation Society, which is right next door to me in Massachusetts. And that was it. That was really the beginning. And so since that time, obviously meditation has grown in popularity and an understanding. Like in those days, say 74, 75, and for years, some years after that, if I'd be at a party or some social situation and people would say, "What do you do?" And I'd say, "I teach meditation." They would kind of go, "Oh, that's like weird." And
Right. Yeah.
now now we don't have parties, but pre-pandemic, the common response, if I said I was a meditation teacher, would be, "I'm so stressed out. I could use some of that." And so there's been a lot more research and science and really, I think, a greater understanding that it's truly not like joining a belief system. It's really about the power of your own mind. And so, we've seen the growth from, a very kind of narrow band of people being interested in learning how to do it to just this movement, which is really startling.
Well, I know I experienced that at my college when I tried to bring meditation. I was told, don't use that word, say self-reflection, use reflection. And now it's become obviously realized that it's research-based and it's all of its benefits are realized. So,
and Sharon, what I think for a lot of our listeners here and people that I come across when I speak about talking about meditation or my own experience with it, I know you've heard this, so I want you to kind of speak to it. I think it would help people is they'll say, "Well, I can't do that. I can't even sit still." And so they don't even want to attempt that because they feel like it's something that they wouldn't be able to accomplish. So I'm wondering if you could kind of speak to that first impression that people have of meditation, and what words would you say to say, "Listen, give it an opportunity, just sit," and because that's what I hear. Like, "Oh my God, I sit down and my mind's rushing I can't get to that place of, Om, being real quiet, and they kind of like have a little bit misinterpretation of it."
Right,
yeah. So
right.
could you share with I know that you have your students or people starting out in meditation have said that to you. What's your response to them?
Yeah, that is a very common comment. And often people phrase it as, "I tried that once, I failed at it."
Yes.
And we believe you cannot fail at it. You can't have the wrong experience. You can have a challenging experience, but it's never wrong because our goal is not to wipe out thinking.
Yes.
Or to have a totally blank mind. It's to change our relationship to everything, to emotions, to thoughts, to physical sensations, so that we're empowered. And we, like those moments when like you're kind of angry and you don't even realize you're angry and you go off to the computer and you type out the email and you press send. And then 2 hours later you go, "Whoops," like, I guess I said that with some hostility, like, there's something important in knowing what we feel as we're feeling it, not later after we've taken action, and knowing what we're thinking as we're thinking it, because then we have a choice. Do I want to take this to heart? Do I want to cultivate this? Maybe this is best let go of, that nasty thought, for example, that I'm incapable of ever doing anything right. That is probably worth letting go of, It's just an old habit. And so we learn so much about ourselves and what makes us happy and what doesn't, even if we've been told our whole lives, that, oh, this is the direction to go in. When we actually take a direct look, you go like, whoops, I don't think so,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of the loving kindness that you share with people, is digging through the stories of who we think we are. I thought that concept was fascinating, to get down to that we are perfect as we are. Like a lot of people say, I can't do this, I can't do that. Would you share a little bit about that kindness to ourselves?
Yeah, the loving
regarding
kindness, yeah.
meditation.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we can call it loving kindness, we can call it self-compassion, which is, kind of the current Western psychological term, is like this hidden ingredient in a lot of accomplishment. We tend to think that being kind to ourselves, or, we've blown it, we've made a mistake, having some compassion for ourselves is like laziness, it's losing standards of excellence or something like that. But I'm told, I'm not a scientist, but I'm told that research shows that any kind of performance test one might go through as part of research, in a harsh, punitive environment, internal or external, our performance will spike, but briefly, then we'll crash.
Mm.
And that the most effective way to actually make a change, to develop a new habit, to learn something new, to make progress in anything, is self-compassion. You blew it, you realize that, you maybe lessons learned. It's not like you ignore it, like what happened, but maybe there are things to have learned, and then you go on. You don't just kind of stay there. Like, I'm so terrible, I'm the worst meditator that ever lived, I can't believe my mind wandered. You tell these stories or we use these images, but people do that. And then, like, you emerge from a period like that, and not only have you extended the period of the distraction, sometimes considerably, but you're so tired. We're so exhausted and demoralized. It's like we don't have any resilience if we're just on ourselves all the time. And so again, it's something very practical. Like, let's take a look. This idea of self-compassion, which sounds so, like too soft,
Right.
When you actually take a look, you think, oh, look at that. That's how I was able to actually carry out that project. That's how I was able to not be so discouraged because I made that mistake.
Can you discuss the critical importance of breath for people who, many in the West, who we just take it for granted that we breathe, but we don't understand the gift of breath and how it helps us to meditate and take control of our lives?
Sure. I have a friend, Linda Stone. She's known as a thought leader. I don't even know what that is, but she's a thought leader. And we became friends because I was quoting her.
I need a thought leader.
I was quoting her. She had some great line about our time and how we have continuous partial attention.
Oh.
We're always kind of divided and we're paying attention to 15 things at once and stuff. So we got in touch, over my quoting her, and then she came up with another one that was really interesting. Like, I think I had written a book, and a journalist asked me, "What do you think about email apnea?" So I said, "What's email apnea?" And she said, "Oh, this woman Linda Stone, who's now my friend by that time." She said, Linda Stone came up with this phrase that sometimes we're paying attention or we're so concentrated, but in the wrong way. Too much tension, too much stress that we actually stop breathing.
Yes.
And it has some of those physiological and emotional consequences that sleep apnea has. Oh. So I thought that was fascinating. And it's also true, of course, that if we're caught in fight, flight, or freeze in a real kind of primordial stress reaction, very physiologically determined, we stop breathing, or we stop breathing fully. And so there's a lot to be said for just paying attention to how we're breathing. Now, we often use the breath as what we would call a foundational object in meditation, where in the beginning of many schools of meditation, what you do is you choose an object of awareness, you settle your attention on that object, and then when your mind wanders, you practice letting go and coming back. So that's sort of like an essential learning.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, settling our attention on that object, which could be anything. Could be the breath, could be loving kindness, could be a prayer, could be a mantra, could be an image, but we have an object of awareness. The operative word is rest. We rest our attention on that object. Sometimes, not uncommonly, people feel if I grab hold of it really tight, I'll get more concentrated and actually your mind will wander more. So we learn to rest, which is a really interesting tool for our time. Mm-hmm. And then our minds will wander. So we practice letting go gently, no blame, no judgment. And we practice self-compassion in that moment. We let go and we start over. And that's why meditation is sometimes called a resilience tool, because we learn how to do that. So that object, that central object, could be anything. And very commonly it is the feeling of the breath. It doesn't have to be, or it doesn't have to only be, but many teachers will say, well, at least let's have part of your practice be the breath. First of all, you get used to breathing, which comes in handy. And also, as my early teachers would say, the breath is universal. You don't have to call yourself a Buddhist or Hindu or reject anything else. If you're breathing, you could be meditating. And as one teacher said, I always felt very charmingly, he said, the breath is very portable. So that, let's say you have a formal meditation practice of 7 to 12 minutes a day. We can talk later about why I say that. Where you do sit down and you lie down, if sitting is uncomfortable. I mean, there are lots of options for posture, but it's a dedicated period where you think, okay, now I'm going to cultivate greater awareness and compassion and so on. And you use something like the feeling of the breath to come back to yourself, to come back to the moment. Then you're at work, or you're commuting, or you're in some crazy busy scene and there's pressure and chaos and you're starting to get anxious. You can breathe. You don't need equipment. You don't need to open up the closet door and pull something out. You don't need to sit down cross-legged and close your eyes and look weird. Nobody even has to know you're doing it.
Yeah.
So you have a completely portable resource. And so that's why the breath is so often chosen. Mm-hmm. Now, for some people, the breath doesn't quite work. There's, physical issue or an emotional issue. Mm-hmm. So then we say, see if you can choose something else happening in your body, like your hands touching. Something that is easy to access, so that when you are in a more complex environment, you can use something like that. And then when we come back to ourselves in that moment, say at work, we also come back to what we care about. We remember our values. It's not a small thing to kind of recenter in that way. And it's right there.
Mm-hmm. Sharon, I want to go back to a couple of things. This is really fascinating. I'm really glad that you're touching on these, because I think our traditional understanding of meditation is that you need to find some place and you need 20 minutes. It's 20 minutes and you're going to sit for 20 minutes. And so I just heard you say 7 to 12. I also heard you say you could do this at work. You could do it at certain times when your stress levels really go high. So I'm hearing some myths, and I don't know if it's a myth. But I'm wondering about that 20-minute piece that has always been attached to meditation. So if you could speak to that, because it sounds like if you don't have 20 minutes, you could do less and still get a benefit, and then share the 7 to 12 if you.
Sure. Well, you could say we divide meditation into the formal practice that we're going to do, let's say every day, And then what one Tibetan Lama I heard once describe high up in the Himalayas, you call short moments many times. That's like drinking your cup of tea and not multitasking at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Feeling the warmth of the teacup, smelling the tea, tasting the tea. Maybe the most famous of that is this recommendation from the Vietnamese teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, don't pick up your phone on the first ring. Let it ring 3 times and breathe.
Oh.
And then you pick it up. So it's just introducing these moments, like a little mini pause where you can come back to yourself during the day. And I once went into a finance firm in New York, and I said that about let your phone ring 3 times, and I looked up and I saw the complete panic on everyone's faces. I said, okay, maybe if you just twice, let it ring twice, but it's nothing long that's going to undo your to-do list, but just this little sprinkling
Mm-hmm.
of awareness, of compassion throughout your day. And then there is the formal dedicated period, so there are schools, of course, TM or Transcendental Meditation, maybe most well known amongst them, which say 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. And, that's a different approach, or it's a different school of meditation. So I can't really speak to the basis of why they say that. In terms of the practices that I teach, I think it's great if you can do 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening. What I've heard from neuroscientists, the first neuroscientist I talked about this with was a few years ago. And they were researching the methods that I teach. And so, it was very familiar. And this one neuroscientist who's very prominent in the field said to me what they had found was that 7 to 9 minutes a day would actually change your brain.
Wow.
And, again, I'm not a scientist, but they talk about all these
Yep.
changes in your brain.
But the chances are, if it's short, you're going to continue to do it.
Yeah.
And make it a part. It's integrated into your life.
That's right. And the everydayness of it seems more important
Mm-hmm.
than the actual length of time. So I said to him, I don't know if it's that healthy to go for the bare minimum, and it's also, there's something very American about it. Like, what's the least amount of time I can put into this thing, and
Right.
get the result I want. But nonetheless, I found that fascinating.
Yeah.
He wasn't saying like 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, or you get nothing. And these are measurable changes in terms of fMRIs and other things, So, so then recently I was on a Zoom panel, and there was another friend of mine, a neuroscientist, a woman named Amishi Jha, who was a lab at the University of Miami. And I was quoting this other neuroscientist, and who's very prominent in the field, and I said 7 to 9 minutes a day, but I could see her face on the screen, and she didn't look that happy. So I said, "Okay, Amishi, what are you thinking?" And she said, "Well, my lab found 12 minutes a day." So clearly nobody actually knows, like
Sure.
this precise unit. But again, she wasn't saying, "Oh, it's got to be 18 hours," or you get nothing. So people are talking about a relatively small investment in time.
Yes.
But it needs to be real.
Yeah, it keeps it real. One of the things that you share in your book of happiness, and by the way, I don't think we gave you the recognition that you are a New York Times bestseller, and you're on book 11. So there's a lot of resources for our listeners after this, should you want to contact or connect with Sharon's information. But one of the things that you shared, making it real, is the different types, which you started to talk about the tea, sipping tea, but you also shared in your book, which I thought was interesting, phrase meditation, of saying loving things to yourself, which I'll let you talk about that, and walking meditation. There are so many different ways to just be mindful or to be in the present. If you wouldn't mind talking about those.
Yeah, there are many different ways in terms of, I mean, there are all kinds of ways in which we maybe start with the breath. And this is in sitting, for example. We start with the breath, but then we pay attention to the sensations that appear and the emotions that appear, and developing a different relationship with whatever's happening. So basically, we're trying to bring our attention closer to what is actually happening without being confused by so many add-ons. Like commonly, for example, if we feel discomfort in our bodies or emotional pain, heartache, disappointment, right away we start thinking, what's going to feel like tomorrow? What's going to feel like next week? What's going to feel like next month? So not only do we have the actual discomfort that is happening that we need to face, but we have all this anticipation that we're adding on top of it. And we're like a wreck, because we're trying to deal with a year's worth of pain right now. And we can't do that. So we learn, it's not that helpful to project into the future that way. I'm more empowered by dealing with what actually is. Or maybe there's an emotional state. Our whole lives we've been taught, well, don't go there, that's wrong. And that's the very emotional state that's coming up. And so there's something in us that wants to just push it away or deny it. And so what happens when we're there with it? So mindfulness can be described as a quality of awareness where our perception of what's happening in the present moment is not distorted by bias, by old habit, and so on. So those old habits will arise, but we see them, we let go of them, and then we're just with what is. So we ultimately want to be aware of everything, not just the breath, although that's the foundation, but whatever becomes predominant in our experience. And we can do that sitting, we can do that walking, we can do that, whatever. And that's what we kind of bring into life when we feel the warmth of the teacup and we smell the tea and we taste the tea. There are other forms of meditation which loving kindness would be included under. I mean, they're very connected. They really support one another, just stylistically different. Where I call it the stretch, where we realize, like, maybe I'm used to paying attention in a certain way. It's almost like a rut at this point. And I'm going to experiment. I'm going to see what it's like to pay attention in this other way or to this other thing. So it takes some intentionality, not force, but it's like a willingness to step into this other terrain. I should also say that other terrain is true. It's not phony, but it may get very little airtime. So a perfect example of that kind of practice would be gratitude reflection, where many researchers, many psychologists say that one of the most healing things any of us can do is keep a gratitude journal where every night we write down 3 things we're grateful for from the day. And although somebody said to me once, I think I'm going to try to find 1 thing a month. And I said, I don't think that's enough. Right. Usually they say 3 a day. And they don't have to be magnificent or grandiose. They can be seemingly small, but we don't usually pay attention to that. And some people don't want to. They think, well, that's like so weird and I'll get too compliant, and it's like being given crumbs in life and being told to be grateful for it. But actually, it's a source of strength. We don't feel so depleted. We don't feel so ineffective or like we have no inner resource. It actually buoys us up, which may mean enough energy to challenge, an environmental adversity or whatever. But it's not weakening. It's actually strengthening. So when I teach it, I also say that this doesn't come naturally to me. Mm-hmm. My personal conditioning, my family conditioning, my cultural conditioning is such
I think that's critical.
Yeah.
that I'm so much more likely to come to the end of the day and think what I can complain about. like I didn't show up in the way I had hoped to, and someone else disappointed me. And, in recently prior times when I was always traveling, there's always an airline, and that's just where my mind would go. So it takes intentionality to say, well, that may all be true. I'm not denying that, but what else happened today?
Mm-hmm.
What do I usually neglect or ignore? And that brings in the other side.
One of the big ahas I got from your work was regarding mindfulness and the stories, which I guess I'm attached to that because I found that's where I was living. I'm trying to get out of that. But a lot of what I worry about in the past, things that may have upset me, I create more story to it than was real. And then when I worry about the future, what's going to happen next, again, I'm creating that none of it was actually real. So thank you for sharing how to be in the present more. So that was very helpful for me.
I like the techniques of, one of the things I keep thinking of paradigm shifting here, Sharon, as I hear you share, your experiences and your teachings. I think that as Westerners, that because of where I'm at, I think that we place this assumption that, this has to be a certain way. Like if you're going to do meditation, you have to do it a certain way. And what I really like, what you're sharing and teaching, is the practicality of it. And you can still achieve the results by having these practical moments and having these small achievable moments, which I really like. And just that
authenticity.
And authenticity, right?
Yeah.
So even with the gratitude journal, I mean, just going over the 7 to 9, 7 to 12 minutes or whatever. I mean, it's giving people another framework to reflect out of that can then say, that I can do. Like I can find the 7. Maybe I often used to say this when we always talk about how, we don't have enough time to do whatever, whatever that way is. And at one point I was looking at what can I remove out of my daily activities that isn't benefiting me.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I did was I looked at television and I said, how much time are you spending with television? And although I felt I was spending not a lot of time, it was even 2 hours, which was like, I'm going to catch the news in the morning. I might catch a half an hour here and maybe but it was 2 hours. And so I eliminated that. And I came up with 2 more hours that I could spend doing these healthy self type of things. And so I think this is really helping people get real and have some practicality to the things that you're teaching, because it's going to have a great benefit not only for self, but as you talk about in your most current book.
That's what I'd like to get to.
Yeah, where you talk about how that effect can be beyond the self.
Right.
Which I'd like to really kind of go into, because in your current book, Real Change, Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World. And what I actually think is fascinating about that, Sharon, is that from my understanding, you wrote that book prior to the pandemic.
I did.
But yet but in that book it feels like a lot of things that are happening to people now with the isolation, the loneliness, that there are things that you address in that book that can be in your book that can be very helpful. So I find that the timing of that is synchronicity is just very clear to me. So one thing I'd like to ask you about is the Metaminute. Can you share what that is for our listeners?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for saying that about the book. I turned it in last, I think it's December or January, and it was supposed to come out in June, and then it got postponed until September. And my great fear was that I wrote a totally irrelevant book, because everything was so extreme. And the only part of the book that is newer is the preface, because I turned in the manuscript, and a friend of mine was reading it in order to excerpt it for something. And he said to me, while he liked the book, and there are chapters in there like moving from anger to courage, or grief to resilience, and
Mhm.
remembering to take in the joy that feel very pertinent to now. He said he kept reading the book and seeing the examples and thinking, that's what made you anxious? Wait till you see what's coming. So at that point, I went to the publisher who delayed the book, and I said, would it be okay if I wrote a new preface that actually kind of tried to bring in the very current. Of course, time always goes on and more things happen, but this was just post-pandemic, and so and they said yes, and so that was a really fascinating process, because my overarching question to myself was, what's still true? In such enormous disruption and uncertainty and anxiety and grief, and what's still true? Like, what am I relying on? What can one rely on that is not actually also changing in that radical way? And it brought me very close to the things I rely on in my meditation practice, and the tools, and the sense of centering, and the power of love, and things like that. So that was actually a really important process for me as well in doing it. And then the book came into the world, and I was like, I hope,
Yeah. Oh.
And I guess what Michael was saying, that sense of self-love, how does that expand into a sense of community?
Well, one of the things that I did in the creation of this book was interviews with a tremendous number of activists. I should also say that going back a bit, our earliest teaching in this country and around the world was really just open retreats. Whoever wanted to come would show up, and then that moved into classes or workshops, or as well as retreats, and it was always an open experience, and it still often is. But in more recent years, I also began working more specifically with people we call caregivers, which I always think there's got to be a better word, but that's the word. People who either personally or professionally are dealing with someone else's suffering, or the system, like a seemingly intractable system of suffering. And I've spent a lot more time bringing tools of, say, meditation to that population. And that's a really powerful population for me. I always feel like people are so unheralded, uncelebrated in that role, and they're holding up the entire society, So I was part of a 4-year program through this place called the Garrison Institute for domestic violence shelter workers, people who worked in frontline jobs in the shelters, and then international humanitarian aid workers, people going into the refugee camps, say in Syria, and more recently, ambulance drivers, medical personnel, physicians, nurses. And it's such a powerful place, being on the front lines of suffering, trying to serve, to make a change, and often burning out, not from a lack of empathy, usually commonly from a lack of some kind of balance, like compassion for oneself as well as for others.
Right.
Or being able to appreciate a sense of limits without feeling you failed. And, so there's a kind of balance that comes in there. So, as time went on and I was doing more and more work with these people, I thought, who do they remind me of? And I thought, they remind me of activists, it's kind of the same syndrome, like tremendous caring and effort and work. And, those aren't the people who suffer as we see so many people suffering from a lack of empathy, which also, it's so significant and impactful. But these people have plenty of empathy, but they're burning out, for other reasons. And so I started doing more work with activists, just seeing, kind of these tools be of some service. You who are serving all of us, And part of what I saw then, back to the book, I was interviewing a lot of people for the book who are trying to make a difference in this world in some way or another. And there was this hidden theme I felt that maybe was exemplified most in this one woman who was one of the leaders of the striking fast food movement in New York City, striking for $15 an hour minimum wage and the right to unionize. And I had met many people like that, and many of them told me, even my family told me, like, don't make waves, don't stand up, you get so little and you work so hard anyway, and you're gonna have nothing, like. But there was this moment, as this woman Chantel described, where it's like an inner sense of like, I'm worth more than that,
Mm-hmm.
And there's a sense of one's innate dignity or innate worth, and that propels people to stand up. And you can see the direct link, because it's not only for herself. She would say, look at these younger people coming in, and they're going to have nothing too, like, it's just not right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that care for oneself in the most authentic way leads to a kind of care for others, which leads to action.
Wow.
That is beautiful.
That's powerful.
It is.
So I'm going to read, we got lost on the Metaminute. So can you?
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine.
No, the Metaminute is good.
That was a good path.
No, but I am curious. So
yeah. So I was in an airport somewhere a few years ago, and somebody wrote a tweet for me. So I was on my phone on Twitter for change, and it said something like, "Couldn't Meta METTA
mm-hmm.
means loving kindness." And Pali, which is like a sister language to Sanskrit.
Mm-hmm.
So she wrote to me and she said, couldn't Sharon Salzberg have a minute of metta for the kids in cages at the border?
Oh.
And I thought, that's a really powerful idea. And so I wrote back and I said, I'm in an airport, like, I'm going home for, 3 days, and I'll see if I can write a script and record it, and then, we can play it. And so I did. I wrote a script encouraging people to offer a minute of loving kindness to these kids. Mm. And I was at another airport like 4 days later when it was on. So I did my minute in the airport. And it was really interesting because the response was very varied. Many people wrote and said, thank you, because there's such a feeling of helplessness also. Mm-hmm. And if we can do something energetically, like this offering of may you be happy, may you be safe, as a kind of energetic gift giving, it also links us up, and then we don't feel so helpless, and then we might see what action we might take. But, so many people wrote in appreciation, and several people wrote in criticism, like saying, well, you're as bad as the people who just offer, thoughts and prayers. You're not doing anything. Why aren't you, taking action? Why aren't you donating? Why aren't you, Mm-hmm. And all I could write back would be, it's hard for me to look at this level of pain. And it's not just me, but it's hard to look at this level of pain. And every time I can connect to something bigger, it helps me stay there rather than look away. Mm-hmm. And I'm not confusing meditation with action, but let's take a look at how we do take action, how we don't just stay feeling helpless and kind of overcome or depleted. And so I think that kind of energetic connection and the ability to be with a really painful, difficult situation to look at is what allows a lot of people to take action. Mm-hmm. And so that was just the stand that I took.
Putting a spotlight on it, I think gaining awareness for people is the number one step, the first step that people would take to taking action. You have to be aware of what's going on, that there are cages to begin with. So one thing that I want to ask, which is kind of maybe digressing or whatever, but we love Krishna Das as well. And we know that you two are dear, dear friends and work so well together. He sings the sacred syllables, and then you take us into a sacred place through your meditation practice. Could you tell us a little bit about how you two met, the story of the two of you? Because I think it's a beautiful relationship, partnership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Well, I went to India in, I guess, September, the beginning of the semester in 1970. And I went, as many people did, virtually everybody in those days, overland, which means I flew to London. I took the Orient Express train to, Istanbul, and went overland buses and trains and so on, all the way to India. And then I kind of wandered around India a bit, looking for just what I had described, very practical, direct, how-to experience of meditation. And I couldn't find it right away. It just, didn't happen that readily. And finally somebody directed me to, somebody said there was going to be an international yoga conference happening in New Delhi. And this is still, this is maybe December of 1970. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll go there and I'll find a teacher. So I went there, and that was like a completely dismal experience, where the low point was where these yogis and swamis were up on the stage grabbing the mic and trying to be the first to speak. It was like awful. So I thought, well, this is hopeless. But at that conference, Dan Goleman, who, decades later wrote Emotional Intelligence,
yes.
For some reason, he was giving a talk at that conference. I have no idea why. At the time, he was a graduate student at Harvard studying meditation in the psychology department. And at the end of his talk, he said, in a few days, he was leaving for this town called Bodh Gaya. And he was going to do an intensive 10-day meditation retreat, which was described as, being really practical and direct and kind of the how-to. And I thought, oh, that's it. That's what I want. And it was it. So a number of people basically followed Danny to Bodh Gaya. And January 7th, I started my first intensive 10-day retreat. And so Krishnadas was there as a student, then known as Jeffrey. Ramdas was there, known as Ramdas, as a student. So I met Joseph Goldstein, and Danny, of course, was there, and many of my still really closest friends were at my first retreat. And so we've known each other, these many years. This is, the years go by. Every time I'm introduced, I think, really?
Wow.
It is amazing.
So I think we're getting close to finishing up, and I just wanted, and I know that you've offered to lead us through about a 5-minute or so meditation, which I think is really exciting, and looking forward to that. Before we do that, though, a couple of things I want to just draw some attention to that I got out of your book that I thought, first of all, your book again is The Real Change: Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World, and I would recommend our listeners to get that book, because not only is it timely, but I think then all the challenges that we're having right now with this sense of isolation and fear and lack of compassion, that you will find some comfort in this book, and as well as getting some helpful techniques. I just think it's very timely and worthwhile. And in that book, you share that your mother often shared a passage that said, "Tranquility itself is not freedom from the storm, but peace within it." I think that was beautiful. That just struck me when I read that. And I know that your goal is to have the book serve to connect us, that we are not defined by isolation, fear, but rather by wisdom, generosity, and love. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. So I want to thank you for that, Sharon. Also, for our listeners, 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock today, Sharon is going to have a live stream meditation. It's called Find a Moment of Calm. You can find out more information about that at SharonSalzberg.com/events. So if you'd like to have a little bit more of Sharon today, you can tune into that. So with that, Sharon, I'll turn it over to you for our 5-minute meditation, and then that'll take us out for the day.
Sure, thank you. Well, why don't we go back to that kind of foundational exercise, beginning with the breath that I described, and we can do a little loving kindness toward the end of that. So you can sit comfortably, close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. See if you can settle your attention in your body and notice where the breath is strongest for you or clearest for you. And this is just the normal, natural breath. You don't have to try to make it deeper or different. Just however it's appearing. You find that place. Maybe it's the nostrils or the chest or the abdomen. Bring your attention there and just rest. See if you can feel one breath without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath, just this one. And if you find your attention wandering, you get lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. We say the most important moment in the whole process is the next moment after you've been gone, after you've been lost, where we have the chance to be really different. So instead of blaming yourself or calling yourself a failure, see if you can let go gently. And just begin again. Bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. We let go and we begin again. And now for a few minutes, rather than the feeling of the breath being that central object, let's use the silent repetition of certain phrases. The phrases are gift-giving, they're offering. It's like a blessing, first to ourselves and then to others. Common phrases are, may I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. Live with ease means in the things of day-to-day life, like livelihood and family, may not be such a struggle. May I live with ease. May I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. You just repeat these phrases over and over again. You don't have to try to force a special feeling or emotion. See if you can gather your attention behind one phrase at a time. And the skill set's just the same. Your mind will wander. It'll go all over the place. That's okay. See if you can let go and come back. In this case, come back to the phrases. And then someone that you care about, someone who's helped you, someone who, when you think of them, you smile. Could be an adult, could be a child, could be a pet. Who makes you smile? If there's someone, you can bring them here. Get an image of them, say their name to yourself, get a feeling for their presence, and offer these phrases of loving kindness to them. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And then all beings everywhere, all people, all creatures, all those in existence, near and far, known and unknown. May all beings be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. Jamie, let's not do the outro. We'll just leave it. Sharon, thank you so much again. We deeply appreciate you, and we deeply appreciate your work. And thank you for that wonderful meditation. What a beautiful way to end the show today. So,
Well, thank you. Really.
It was an honor. Thank you.
And you made it very easy for me, which is an extremely important thing.
Thanks again. Safe travels and everything that you do, Sharon. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We deeply appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.